Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, everyone who follows us on Facebook and Twitter. My name is Matthias Radostic, and I am the Deputy Head of Mission of the Austrian Embassy here in Delhi. And as such, I'm also in charge of cultural affairs. Welcome to our occasional lecture. The occasional lectures are a series that we have started last year, and this is now the third event in this series. Let me first of all make clear that we are here in full compliance with all government rules and regulations when it comes to COVID. As you can see later, and now everyone here is wearing face masks. We are practicing social distancing, and we are well below 100 people, which is the number that is allowed presently by the government. We have sanitized, and we have also taken our temperatures before we came here. May I first of all shortly introduce our panelists for this evening. First and foremost, Dr. Pushpesh Pant. He has been with us from the beginning, so we are very grateful, Dr. Pushpesh, that you are with us again. Very happy. Dr. Pushpesh is a very renowned historian. He's a retired professor from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, a professor of international relations. He has been working on a number of issues, and not only international relations and history, but also on food. So you're an expert on food and cooking. Welcome, Dr. Pushpesh, and thank you very much for joining us. Our second panelist today is Dr. Achal Pandya. Thank you very much for joining us as well. Dr. Pandya is an associate professor at the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, and as such also very well versed in history. So we invited him here. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us. And last but not least on our panel, Mr. Munish Bahel, who is the brain behind this whole lecture series, and who also did a great deal of research for it. And Mr. Bahel then will act as Master of Ceremonies. Our topic tonight is, as you have seen, Josef Tiefenthaler. Josef Tiefenthaler was an Austrian Jesuit monk. He was born in Bozen, in Bolzano, which is in today's Italy, but at the time was well within Austria. And he came to India, and he interacted with a lot of famous and renowned people, as you will hear during the seminar. And he is the father of Indian geography and the father of Indian maps. But not only that, he was active in many fields. And one of those fields was astronomy. He was also fluent in Sanskrit, as I learned. He made a lot of descriptions of his journeys, including the flora and fauna and the social and cultural life of the people. So he's a very valuable source of what India was in the 18th century. And he's also a proof that the Austrian-Indian relations not only date back to Indian independence, but they date back way before Indian independence, several centuries. So without much further ado, I would like to hand over to our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Munish Bahel. Please, Mr. Munish, get the dialogue started, because it's a dialogue, it's not a lecture. We want to have a dialogue, so please get the dialogue started. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radostic. Thanks a lot. And I would like to formally also welcome our professors, Dr. Pushpesh Pant and Dr. Pandya. Thank you very much for coming and helping me, of course, in this journey of locating and, finding out and doing the research work for this great personality who's really, in true sense, has been forgotten, and has a fantastic and a great contribution to the Indian scenario altogether. So, I mean, I would rather say that, when I was given the entrusted job to go in for a research work, and very little was in fact I could find out, and I was really getting a bit nervous when I spoke to Dr. Pushpesh Pant that I'm not able to do, and my research work is just standing still for two reasons, of course. One was, of course, there was a scarcity of material, and second was that there was a complete lockdown. So our prime institutions and everything, they were closed. So there were hardly any other sources, where we could, apart from being, guided by the great professors like Dr. Pant. Now, slowly, gradually, of course, we could manage to collect we could manage to get the research work done, and then, I could get the material also. And now I think so formally, when we thought that there was enough of material that will give us to, we thought that this personality has got so many other aspects in him that it's really very difficult to discuss about him in 1 hour's time. There is hardly any, or in a webinar of 1.5 hours time. So because we will be doing injustice that we talk of this personality in one particular aspect and then we ignore the other. But to explain the whole in totality, we need more time. So the best part was that we thought, okay, instead of going in for the conventional lectures and, talking about the personality, let's start an interactive session itself. And in this interactive session, we will, pose questions, answer doubts, thereby covering whatever is coming in the mind of us. That, be it his geographical contribution, be it his economical, historical, be it his astronomical, anything we can do. So with that, we start this particular, our session over here, which has been, now we have third lecture in series. And I must admit that this was the brainchild of our present ambassador, Mrs. Oppinger Walshofer. She is in Vienna, probably she might be watching us. And now before I start with it, I would like to rather ask Dr. Pushpesh Pant as to, before we speak on this particular personality as in totality, or we rather going for interactive session, would you like to open up the session in a way that, we could have his guidance through how we can, he can pave a way for us?
Before I do anything else, Munish, I think you are being unnecessarily modest. There is a paucity of material about Tiefenthaler in 18th century, both in India and abroad. There is very little to go by. But I think you have done an absolutely fantastic job of researching a multifaceted personality, and I must compliment you, and I would say that with a little more effort, perhaps you can get a doctorate or at least an MPhil on basis of the research you have done. You have been very generous about your appreciation of what little help I could render you, but I think you have single-handedly performed a fantastic job of rekindling interest in a forgotten Austrian who deserves not only to be better known but commemorated and honored both in India and in Austria. So I think that's to begin with. I would also submit that perhaps this small interactive session, as you said, cannot cover the personality and his contribution in various diverse fields. So maybe a small book can emerge out of this interaction followed up by you there. And I am very grateful to you. The kind of information you provided made me think several things about the period when Tiefenthaler was in India. Let's not forget that when he came to India, this was before the French Revolution, before even the American Revolution. It was after the death of Aurangzeb, but before the decisive battles of 18th century, the Panipat III and Plassey-Wehr fort, which established British paramountcy. So you have this period of political tumult in India, disturbances, raids by foreigners, and this man was risking his life. Please, let's keep in mind the state of transport and communication at that time. Yes. So, and he was a young man at the age of 30 when he came, but when he died, he had spent 45 years in India. So he was a reasonably old man. So first of all, I'm amazed that a person who didn't have the natural herd immunity of the natives survived such a long, and the life expectancy then was much smaller. So he faced the brigands, he may have had support of rich and powerful patrons, but there was a missionary driven by a zeal to explore in what he says. So I think I am fascinated by a man, and although the contributions of earlier Indian scholars like Dr. Sen and Professor Munis Raza deal with his contribution in the field of cartography, and as Matthias said very correctly, he is the father of the Indian geography. Most people will be a little reluctant to concede the title of the father of Indian geography to somebody who is not a native born Indian. But the problem is that one must acknowledge in the field of science that he brought a certain exactitude, a certain objectivity, a certain scientific method of observing and reconfirming. He was not taking for granted whatever he had read in an earlier source like Ain-e-Akhbari or Al-Baroon in the Kitab-ul-Hind. He was trading step by step, and he was measuring and observing and comparing. So that contribution should be very much acknowledged gratefully. But what fascinates me, as the Dr. Sen of Jamia, the foreword of the book was written by Munis Raza, who is a professor of geography in Naval University, JNU, makes a fascinating point that this was historical geography at its best. He was talking not only about the land, the contour, the terrain, distances, longitude, latitudes. He was making observations about cultural geography. What were the crops grown? What did the people eat? How they lived? So this is a distant mirror, almost 300 years old, which sheds such new light on India then, where most of the time we are occupied by political history, military history, what happened in Panipat, what happened in Plassey, what happened to the Marathas. But there is this man, a foreigner, an objective traveler, keeping his distance, scientifically trained, giving us a picture of India as it existed at that point in time. It's a fascinating snapshot of India at that time.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pandya, would you like to add on your points into that, please?
I'll definitely second Dr. Pushpesh Pant in telling that the amount of research that you have done, it really deserves to come in form of a book. So, what we had given you is, I think, really very less, but what you provided us was a thorough research on Tiefenthaler, and till now, he was an unsung Jesuit priest in India. We all know Father Montserrat. He's mentioned quite often in discussions and all, but we really knew very less about Tiefenthaler. The only source of information which is available is from the book book he has written, which was later on compiled by Bernoulli about Tiefenthaler. His the translations in French and German are the only source of information. A lot of work is still needed. I feel the research that you have done, if it is added with more research, I think we can throw more light on Tiefenthaler. And this 1 hour discussion is really not at all sufficient for a personality like Tiefenthaler.
Yeah.
So for me, Joseph Tiefenthaler was really a fantastic man, coming from Spain via Portugal to Goa, and then from Goa to Jaipur, Agra, and covering the length and breadth of India. He went up to the Multan, Sindh. He went to Kashmir. He went up to Hooghly and measured the longitude, latitudes, and created a map, which later on became the basic point of creating the great maps of Hindustan, which is known as Great Maps of Hindustan by Wendell and Duperron. So that's his contribution to the cartography. In addition to that, he was talking about the culture, about the food, about the fertility of a soil, about the flora, fauna. His treatises on natural history have been lost from us. We do not know. He had sent these treatises to Copenhagen to his Jesuit friend, but nothing is known about it now. So I think that we need more research on his contribution to the natural history, the contribution to the flora and fauna, and the sketches that he created is a great resource of making history of India, wherever he traveled. He was a very good, besides cartographer, he was really trained in making good sketches, which when you look, they look really up to scale. So that's his contribution, and I think he deserves more. He is an unsung contributor to the culture and history of India. He deserves more. I think a statue in Agra or in Lucknow, or a name to name a road, like we have named a small lane here in front of the French embassy to Andre Malraux. I think a lane next to.
We have a road to Copernicus.
Copernicus.
So
I think next to this embassy, you can have a lane named after Joseph Tiefenthaler.
Thank you very much. That's a very good idea. I'm sure our deputy will be very excited to work on that.
It seems that we have a lane without a name, right?
That's the thing. So we can do that,
Yes.
in fact, you know. But in a short, I would rather say, which I'm sure, you know, Mr. Radhastesh will agree to me, that in short, you have, you know, given us such a nice and such a florific, you know, description of this personality. Now, before going further, I would rather come back to Dr. Pant. So, how do we proceed with kindly pave the way, because we would like to know the maximum about this personality and the maximum. Do you want that the PPT what we have prepared, we go through that and we discuss?
Yes, I think that would be very nice, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words,
Right.
although it needs words to say so.
Absolutely.
But these are words and images which Tiefenthaler has left. So
Right.
this is primary source material. So
Right.
even his perspective, when he is giving us a sketch, tells us what he considers important and what he keeps out of the frame. So very much less of a...
So we do that
Yes,
simultaneously.
and
That
if we
would
miss, we can go back and forth. There is no issue about that.
And I think so, Dr. Pandya, we agree on to that. Could we have the PPT, please?
This, I think, is the Black Taj Mahal, the Bibi Ka Maqbara from Aurangabad, Deccan. He doesn't describe his journeys in Deccan in such detail as he does in Ganga Basin, but this gives you a fair idea of what was being referred to by Dr. Pandya, the precision of his pen and ink strokes and scales which he uses, and perspective.
This must be an aerial view, Dr. Pandya.
It could be an aerial view. He couldn't have gone to, I used a drone, but it is basically the artist's imagination, or climbing up to a height and getting a top angle shot of what he is watching.
So that's it. And do you think he had somehow used his old tools of Dr. Pandya of latitudes, longitudes? Because by that time he has really traveled a lot in India.
But I think
Or it's just a sketch only?
This is a sketch, and
Only.
for that he...
For a pen and ink sketch, you don't need longitude, latitude, especially if the monument is in one spot.
Yes.
So the coordinates are already fixed.
Right.
What you are worried about, the perspective, the depth of field, and the proportions of the minarets and the dome and the Charbagh garden in the front.
Yes.
So this is what, you know, he's always making a constant comparison between the monument in Agra, where he spent most of his time, and something which was replicating a Taj Mahal in miniature. Aurangzeb, who was not a monumental
Yes.
builder like his
Like his
father.
grandfather.
So there it
Grandfather.
comes. So
Yeah.
this is it. This, of course, is the announcement of journey to India. Please, let's have the next one. This is interesting because this tells you his predecessors in India, the Jesuits like Father Montserrat and others who came to Akbar's court, and he had a theological debate with them in the Ibadat Khana, and both pictures show the Catholicity of the mind of the Grand Mughal and also the equal Catholicity, and the word comes from Catholic actually, of the Jesuit priests, who were not trying to convert the emperor, but they were having an open debate about basic positions of religion, spirituality, and so on. So this interaction between the Christian missionaries, especially the servants of Christ, Society of Jesus people, and India, is a very interesting Indo-European encounter, which was between equals intellectually and resilient in terms of their religious
So
beliefs.
this one, Professor Pant, I think so you're talking somewhere around 200 years before the arrival of.
He comes here in 1740.
He came in 1743.
1740, and
And this is
Akbar would have died in 1610 thereabouts. You know,
So
after
it's
50
roughly
years.
around that
It's
time.
roughly
So this
150
was at the
years.
peak, you can say, when there was of
I-
the Mughal king.
Yes, at the height of the Mughal power,
Power, this
and
was-
the most active Jesuit priests in India.
Most active
Yes.
ones.
Next, please. This is, I think, Jahangir and a miniature painting in color of Jahangir's
It's the
interaction.
same painting, sir.
Same
the
painting,
same
but
painting.
yes,
It's in colour.
Is
Same
Ibadat
painting.
Khana
It's
in color.
I think here they want to show
Because
the two the
comparisons
two
in-
priests who are sitting there.
Two priests sitting there. True, true, true.
One is Father Montserrat.
But normally Akbar is depicted in a miniature painting with a halo, Dr. Pandya.
Yes, yes. But,
So-
but it's the same black and white image which is shown in color in this thing.
It has to be originally in color.
Yes, yes.
Next. Next, please.
This is
Now,
Jahangir.
this is very interesting, I think, sort of. You know, I mean, in this painting, perhaps I really would like to know from you here is, in this particular painting, if you see, it's a Mughal king Jahangir, and he is with his courtier. But in this painting, we find above over there 4 cupids, you know, the Christian symbols out over there. Now, I mean, this shows the relationship. Was it because of the Jesuits movement at that time?
I think ever since Akbar's legacy of Catholicity and open debate with other religions, he ultimately had a Deen-e-Ilahi, you know, which was an
Deen-e-Ilahi,
amalgam
that's
of various religions. So I think the symbols of angels coming out from Christian, and also let's not forget that certain angels are common to the Old Testament of Bible and Quran Sharif.
That's right.
Gabriel. So you know, the whole concept of good and evil and devil and Iblis and the devil and Archangel Gabriel, Michael, etc. are common. So there is no conflict here. You are having the Bible's Old Testament and angels from the Old Testament. So I don't think there is a conflict at all. In present day India, you might suddenly say, oh, this is a Christian symbol, this is an Islamic symbol.
Yeah.
But the people of the book, whether it's Quran Sharif or the Old Testament, would have no problem with the, or Moses. So listen, the next one, I think you have a color one of this
color
also.
one.
We have a color one of that.
Yes.
But this is, of course, a different one where again we can see.
You have marked in red.
have marked in
You've done
red.
your research work very well. So we can't miss the angels in any case. But come to think of it, even after Jahangir, if you go to Red Fort today,
Yes.
you have a European architect helping him out with imagery which is European, Christian, there on the walls of the Red Fort. So it was a time of tolerance, a time of open debate, both for Jesuits, who are supposed to be hardcore in their religious beliefs and evangelists, but also the Mughal emperors who were Islamic.
That's right. Next, please.
This, I think, shows his trail.
It shows his trail of sailing, you know, from Port Spain. In fact, you know, when he's this is in the year 1743, when he sailed from Spain and he was supposed to come to Goa to either, he was on the call, you know, from his Jesuit authorities. But at the same time, there is parallelly, there is another talk that there is a very strong this thing that Savai Jai Singh, Maharaja of Jaipur, had invited him to come and work with him on the
Church quite big. But this church had again a tumultuous history, because when Jahangir was not getting along well with Portuguese, he destroyed this church. Then again during Shah Jahan period, this church was rebuilt. So this happened with this Akbari church, and it is really an important part of Agra's history vis-a-vis the Jesuits missionaries who had come to India. And Father Tiefenthaler, he spent a lot of his time in this church till he had the monetary problem when Portuguese had completely withdrawn the support from these Jesuit society.
I think that was the time when he was in Narva, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And because he was not in Agra, he had moved away from Agra. Apparently from Agra, what I have read, I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, from Agra basically he was traveling to different places,
Yes, absolutely.
like Mathura, Delhi, even Jaipur again he had done, then Gwalior. So he was making, you know, Agra as the base and then traveling.
Munish, I think is probably it would be correct to divide his life and times and contributions into three different parts.
Right.
A, when he was exploring the Ganga basin,
Right.
and he doesn't explore the Ganga basin from the source or even Haridwar to Hooghly, although he did travel to Hooghly in Bengal, but he concentrates only on the center, which would be called the Hindi Patti, Hindi belt or the Hindi heartland. He talks of Ganga basin, but he gives equal importance to Jamuna. So these travels along Jamuna fascinate me more, because when he says that he travels to Bithur, to Kanpur, to Kalpi, then to Bada, then to Kalinjar, and then onwards when he comes towards Jamuna, he covers Mathura and Agra and Delhi.
That's right.
And then he goes to Jaipur again. But there's a different journey altogether.
That is
So Dr. Pandya referred to his journeys in Multan, in Punjab, to Kashmir. They are not part of the discussion which we are having at the moment, to my mind. And I would say the second aspect of his journeys are his observations, which he makes not as a cartographer, but with a very acute and a perceptive traveler. He goes to Banaras and says, I saw these young indigent Brahmin boys studying on the street side. And normally, even a person like me who's studied history thinks that these Gurukuls and Pathshalas in Banaras are basically Sanskrit and grammar and astrology and religious philosophy. He mentions specifically that these kids on the street were being taught science and mathematics as well. So it was a person who was interested in teaching and education and science who would notice this. He goes there and says, this is what people eat. And he talks of millets, he talks of crops, and he talks of precious gems and semi-precious stones in Chunar, which is known for its great stones even today. There's a great fort at Chunar. Kalinjar. I mean, Kalinjar again, hopefully we'll be able to see his...
Are we able to revive the PPT?
So can we have the pictures again, please,
So
if you
this
can
is
manage
of
it?
course the Jaipur one part, where he was.
You can have a quick run, yes. We have already spoken about
this
it.
We have already spoken. This is
We have Father Pons and Father Budiye in this image, along with Savai Jai Singh. And these are the instruments that were used for making the observatories. And can you go to the next slide, please? And these are the examples of instrument which Father Stephen Thaler would have used during his journey while measuring these longitudes and latitudes.
So basically they were having those miniatures sort of
Yes, sextants and quadrants.
Whereas here in India we had a huge concrete.
There is also a reason for that, because
Yes.
you know why we have concrete and stone is because the temperature would affect the length and the markings on a metal instrument, which would not be so acute in Europe. So there would be an error, margin of error. So if you had something set in stone and concrete and use the sun and the moon, you would have that's why you have a little gap between the railway lines when they are laid in iron strips, iron rails.
Right.
So there was a reason why they did it.
They did. Yes. Okay, fine. Next.
Kalinjar, अगर आप दिखाएं, there is a fort of Kalinjar which is there, which is very interesting.
Ishwari Singh, son of Savai Jai Singh.
This is the son of Jai Singh,
Savai
of
Jai
course,
Singh.
who was not interested in
In
astronomy.
fact, he
and-
created this Easter Lat or tower made by Ishwari Singh. He was not interested in
But could we possibly have the Kalinjar fort, because we are not so interested in Ishwar Singh's lot as we are in the pen and ink
There is
sketch
we have
of...
to go in further, please. Furthermore.
There is a fort. There is an image of a fort. Oh, all right. As long as these
Now,
are there.
I think so. We will do one thing, Dr. Pant, if you allow me.
Yes. This is the Kalinjar fort.
This is the Kalinjar fort. But before that, there is a very interesting part. So, where the maps are. If we can just take
Please,
the.
please, please. Let's
Can we
go.
just have the reversal part? The reverse part. No. Again, it's gone now. We can't see. This was, of course, the no.
next.
This is the Akbar's church, yeah. of
Next.
course.
There is a map, which you are Ganga Basin map.
This
It
is
will
the
come.
map which
It will
shows-
come. You click some after some time, the map will come, because these are the places which he has covered.
He had covered,
There were much
yeah.
more than that, but according to the literature, this one. Next, please. Next.
No, I think so. Sorry, I'd like to.
Yes.
Dr. Pant, I need your
You know,
comments on this.
this is a
Why
Allahabad-
he has drawn this particular sketch, although this is the one which is from one of the greatest dynasties.
Yes, you see, because this pillar was then at Allahabad, an Ashokan inscription pillar in the fort, and he describes the fort in detail. He describes Akbar's fortification of the fort. His travelogue discovers the Akshay Vat, the eternal tree, the religious ficosa there. He also mentions the superstition of pilgrims jumping from that, thinking that they will get eternal life. And he also doesn't forget that India has a history which goes back millennia. And let's not forget that India's first encounters with the Western world are Alexander's invasion. They're getting in touch with the Ionians and the Indo-Greek connection. So Europe, one step removed, had got to know after Ptolemy. Ptolemy is much later, but this connection must have been at the back of his mind. So he is in a continuity of a chain of European explorers and scientists interacting with Indian potentates who were interested. So Ashoka also was interested in Buddhism. He had edicts inscribed.
So there must have been those inscriptions on this particular.
That's right. That's right.
That's an inscription.
That's right.
Here I would like to immediately take off. I'd like to welcome one of very important guest of ours who has joined, Umesh Mehra. He acted as Bindusara in one of the feature films which has come. He's from Bollywood and he has joined.
Lovely. How nice.
Welcome. So I think so we'll have an interaction with him because he's also a good research scholar. Could we have the PPT please? Yeah, this one, Dr. Pandya, now kindly throw some light on
Actually, when we see, that's why when we started at the beginning, we said that that history can be stitched by the sketches which Tiefenthaler had drawn. So this is the image of 1900, and Tiefenthaler had made the sketch in 1800. So we see in this image there is no capital, while what Tiefenthaler had sketched had a capital. And in 20th century, already a British person had already installed a lion capital on it, and it looks like that today. This is how this Allahabad pillar looks. So we see the changes that are taking place. The changes what the persons who are in charge of that region are making in the historical monuments. The other importance of this pillar is that the Brahmi that we know was deciphered. In fact, this pillar played a major role in deciphering of Brahmi. It had completely lost, and it was deciphered in 19th century by Prinsep.
We have the next one. So this is the map, you know, I mean, when I think so, if I'm not mistaken, when his authorities had taken their support off from him, and he traveled all the way from Allahabad to Calcutta, and this was the so this was on the route to, I think so, River Ganges.
Yes, I think this is a bit Gangetic region, which is really the heart of India, the heartland of India.
Yes.
So this is what I think is fascinating about Tiefenthaler's work, because his many interdisciplinary work, multidisciplinary work sheds light on agronomy, history, climate, demography, population, coming up of towns and so on.
Yeah.
So this map I think is the most important one.
This is the one which shows that there is a
Ganga and Ghagra.
Ganga is coming from Gangotri and Ghagra is coming from Mansarovar, you see, and then it joins Ganga at a point.
At a point, that's right. This was the map which he had drawn, of course, it's available. Now, this comes the fort of Kalinjar again now. Dr. Pant.
You see, this is almost looks like not a pen and ink sketch, but a painter's work. You have perspective, you have depth, you have some kind of a session of a play of light and shade and cloud, and this is an important fort, because this is the fort where the Afghan soldier of fortune, the Emperor Sher Shah Suri, who chased Humayun, Akbar's father, away from Delhi's throne, had a short rule of Afghan rule in Delhi, was killed here trying to capture this fort when a cannonball fired, rocket fired, rebounded, landed on the magazines sitting next to it, and he died of burns. So this changed the fortune of Indian history. Otherwise there would be no Mughal Empire in India, no Taj Mahal, no Shah Jahan, no Deen-e-Ilahi, no Ibadat Khana, no Aurangzeb, Bibi ka Maqbara. So this is what I think fascinated him. So he is not giving us a line sketch of Kalinjar, he is giving us a beautifully shaded, almost three-dimensional image in virtual reality of the fort. And if you go to Kalinjar today, we were shooting a documentary there some time back. This is the present day Kalinjar, and we were warned by the DM of Banda, please don't stay there after sunset. It is the Badlands of UP, dacoits camp in the fort. It's a sprawling fort. So with the police escort, one had to go and shoot the documentary and come back still before sunrise. This man is doing that 300 years ago in an obscure place surrounded by jungles, fierce animals, snakes and scorpions, wasps, and you still have made us think that what role did Kalinjar play? It is a fort which is mentioned in the Hindu epic Mahabharata. So Tiffin-Thaler's sketch takes you back in time and space at the same time, which to my mind is the fascinating impact of this man's little known work in India. And then you decide why he is mentioning these places. These places were important then, either for some religious reason, or from like Chunar, from the precious stones and jade, or a commercial mandi. So you have small towns like Maharajganj, Mohanganj, which are small back of the beyond Mufassil towns. But in his time, they were important, more important than the major cities.
Right. Dr. Pandya, you have to say, you would like to add on to something on that?
I think we'll go to the next slide, which is quite interesting. And since you had brought Narwar, where he spent 18 years of his life,
Yes.
in the Bourbon colony, is important. Next, please. Next. Yes, this one. Yes, previous one.
The one which is previous.
This is the fort of Ajaygarh. I think all his expeditions in Bundelkhand would have been done from Narwar, where he was based for 18 years. He had gone up to Khajuraho, he went to Panna. This fort is in Panna. And here again, it's the same type of description. It's a three-dimensional effect that you see. And now you can see the next one. This is how the Ajaygarh fort looks like now. And whatever the sketches of done by Tiffin-Thaler are saying is equal to the image that we see now. So
I think so. I would like to, take you slightly off the shoot from here. You said, we all know that now. For 18 years, he was the priest for Bourbon families.
yes,
Now, this Bourbon family, if I'm not mistaken, is related to France, yeah?
yes.
And if we all further go down, it's related, I think, to Napoleon
Yes.
also. Would you like to throw some light on that for
Actually,
our audience?
the first Bourbon, he came to India in 1560, and in fact, he had killed someone in France, and to escape from that thing, he had come to Chennai. He settled in Chennai, and from there, Akbar called him, knowing that there's someone who is a Christian and who has come from European world, from a royal descendant. He wanted to meet that person, and this Bourbon Jean-Philippe Bourbon had come to Agra, where he met Akbar, and Akbar was so impressed by his courtly manners that he got him married to his wife's sister. And then later on, this Bourbon, Jean-Philippe Bourbon, he shifted to Bhopal, and there they were the second wealthiest family after the kings of Bhopal. They were the second wealthiest family, and then later on they moved to Gwalior and also to Narwar. That's how we call it a Bourbon colony. Bourbon colony.
So there is a Bourbon colony over
Bourbon
there.
colony.
Are the descendants of the Bourbon till now or till date?
In fact, the current Bourbon family descendant, His name is Balthazar Napoleon IV Bourbon.
Balthasar Napoleon.
But the Napoleon connection is a little far-fetched because Napoleon is a child of French Revolution.
Yes.
And he was a very young Sicilian soldier
Right.
who was fighting there. And he became Napoleon the Emperor only after the 19th century had turned, by which time Tiffenthaler was gone. And
Yes.
Napoleon was not even a twinkle in the eye of his parents when these Bourbons were ruling.
Right.
Because as we started our discussion with, his times are pre-French Revolution.
Pre-French.
Ancient
No,
regime.
Bourbon were
Bourbons were
in
ancient
Marseille
regime.
and Navarre. They had their they hold.
Their hold,
In France, in Navarre, I think, is in Italy, and in France they had their.
No, the Sun King, the Louis XVI, the Louis XIV.
Yes.
You know, the Bourbons
No,
are.
no, that was some sort of an offshoot question I asked, you know. Now coming back again to our Professor Tiefenthaler. Now I just want to know, I mean, for our audience, if you could just say that what happened exactly, because he went, the financial support was taken away from him. The Portuguese, you know, support was out, there was no. And I think so that was the time when he came to know even that his the Society of Jesus has also sort of been suppressed. Now, from there he thought of going to Calcutta. And that was the time when the trail of this mid-Gangetic basin came into it, and he traveled. And that was the time when the cartography skills of his could be seen in prime, and then also the geographical
Munish,
aspect.
I think, Munish, the problem is that we cannot, with any degree of certitude,
Yes.
decide what motivates an individual, even an evangelical missionary, scientific explorer at one point of time. So he joined the Society of Jesus at the age of 19, stayed in Europe for 10 years, came here to win souls, but said that what excited him second most after saving souls was longitudes and latitudes. So there was a scientific streak. And there is this scientific streak which runs into Jesuit priests, whether they are making researches in genetics or in chemistry of alcohol brewing, of delectable liqueurs. But then once he was in India, he found his mission in life and vocation. And I think we are interested in Tiefenthaler because he is a man who made India his home for 45 years and never returned, and dedicated his life in those difficult times of transport and communication to the people of India and charting out a terra incognita which the subcontinent was. Others had done it before. Al-Biruni Kitabul Hind, Travels of Ibn Battuta. Even before that, Travels in the Western World by Fayan and Huyen Sang, translated by Beale. But this man was confirming, cross-checking, recalculating. This is what I think one should recognize in this country. And if the street unnamed is to be named after him, it is these contributions. This is a man who came from Europe. And I think what Mahesh said in the beginning of his, I hope you don't mind my using your first name, I'm much older and it comes more naturally to me, is something very interesting. Most Indians have a British-centric Anglophone view of the world because the British ruled us. And when he said that he came from Tyrol, which was then in Italy but now in Austria, and you have this extremely interesting relationship between Austria, Switzerland, north of Italy, parts of Germany, where you say that, look, Europe was not only Britain. And this gentleman who had come via Spain and Portugal and the Society of Jesus, the original explorers of the Latin American world were the Spanish and the Portuguese. India was claimed to have been discovered by Vasco da Gama, and Sanjay Subramaniam has done this fantastic work on Vasco da Gama's lives and times and his saints and sinners. But then if you come to their Portuguese connection in Goa and the Jesuit connection in Goa, I was accidentally in San Sebastian and we went to Bilbao and we went into a Jesuit seminary, and then we found out that they have documents which say that how the Jesuits came to India and sent missions from India to China and back again. So I think there was this man who was absolutely integral and indispensable to the study of intellectual history, Indian understanding of Europe, European understanding of India, and not having a colonial ruler's prejudice about what. Dr. Pandya did refer to Princeps, line pen and line sketches, but those are commissioned by a British administrator who's ruling a subject people and doing it in Banaras. Now, similarly, the triangulation of the surveys, which comes in the Great Continental Arc, the Geological Survey of India, Lambden's map making, Everest, etc., they are much later in the 19th century. They follow in the footsteps of this man.
Yes.
So he's genuinely a pioneer in cartography, a pioneer in comparative interdisciplinary study of geography and history and economy and strategy. And to my mind, what is more important than this is that it liberates the Indians from a colonial hang-up of Anglophone, British-centric interpretation of either Europe or of India.
If I may ask
Please.
just one question. I'm just quoting here one of Tiefenthaler's quotes, which says, and
If you could zoom it on that,
and,
please.
and I think you mentioned it several times. Next to the salvation of souls and their conquest for God, nothing has afforded me, etc., etc. And you have mentioned several times he came for the conquest of souls. So the Jesuits were missionaries, right? And he says so. I mean, even in his quote, this is the number one thing,
Yes.
saving souls or conquering souls for the Christian God. Now, were there never any friction points with the locals or with the ruling class, being Muslim, being Hindus, that he tried to convert people, or that he was converting people to Christianism, which was not, well received by the rulers or by the people or at the time? Do we know of any of these, or do we know how many people he converted, if at all? If this posed a problem?
That's a
for him?
very interesting question, because he was as much a man of science and spirituality as of religion. So he was saving souls, not necessarily by forcibly converting them, tempting them, but probably see them that they had been so far worshipping false gods. So if the pagans were worshipping, he refers to pagoda in Tuticorin. So if there are false gods, and if you shine it with the illumination of scientific knowledge, they probably see the way of reason. And way of reason then brings you to true religion. So I don't think that the Jesuits ever tried that. The hundreds and thousands of Jesuit missionary schools which opened up in countryside in India afterwards, I think followed this principle that they never have had a conflict with the local religion.
When he reached, was he able to get the support from the British?
Yes, he got the thing, and he could complete the work of his cartography. In fact, when we see in Indian context, the English had the military control, had the political control over India. But if you see the maps that were created, they were all created by French, and mainly Tiefenthaler and also Father Boucher. They had given big contribution. Father Boucher's work is in southern peninsula, and Tiefenthaler contribution is in North India. So that's these were the basic maps which were used by Duperron and also Rendell in the UK to create the map of Hindustan, which was used for strategic reasons, and these are the maps which led to the creation of modern maps as we know them, with all the best equipments and technology.
Was it Dr. Pant also helping the Indian administration of his skills of...
There was no Indian administration worth talking about in the period he was here.
That's
Mughal
true.
Empire had disintegrated.
Absolutely.
And he was traveling.
No, but I mean, there are references in Indian gazettes, and there are also references
the Indian gazetteers are again a creation of the British colonial rulers.
So there is a lot of...
No, they rely a lot
on this.
without acknowledging his researches. So, but then you see there is a very small gap between when he dies and the British start the triangulation of survey, the survey of India. And Lambden comes in.
Right.
And Lambden starts it around that time. The Great Arc has completed about 200 years at the turn of this century. So then maybe there was also simultaneous working on the same thing. But to his credit, to Tiefenthaler's credit is that he remains the pioneer. He is there before the British had attempted it. and he was doing it single-handedly, while the British were doing it with the whole paraphernalia of a newly established Survey of India, government officers, support of administrators. He was working in an area with great social upheaval, economic turmoil, political uncertainty, and doing it on his own. He may have had support, but there was no question of an Indian administration then. There's the famous joke about the Mughal Empire at that stage when he had come here after the death of Aurangzeb,
Right.
that the domain of Shah Alam was from Red Fort to Palam.
That's right.
So,
yes.
so it did not extend much further.
Right. There is a reference of a map which he had made, which was, something like 15 feet in length or something. Could you throw some light on that?
In fact, that was the map which we saw in the PowerPoint.
Which one?
The
Could
big Gangetic map showing Ganga and Ghagra. So, in fact, I will say that Joseph Tiefenthaler was a selfless man. He really worked for the development of science in the field of cartography, but he never strived for getting name for it. He sent this map rolled up to his friend in France, to Duperron, without any letter attached to it. So that was the thing. And later on, Duperron used this map and also the history of India that he had written, the description of India, the historic history and the cultural history of India that he had sent to Duperron. He, along with Bernoulli, they came up with this fantastic work, the book that we see, which is the only reference, existing reference book on Tiefenthaler. There are other things that he had sent to Copenhagen, but they have not seen the light of the day. So they are still a topic of research which should be researched, and more information should come out on Tiefenthaler. In fact, his work on natural history are completely lost. We have no idea, but he was quite keen in natural history of India, the flora and fauna of India, which is briefly described in this book in French and German, Description, the historique et la culture de l'Inde. But his main book on natural history of India is lost, which he had written in 18th century, and which can really open up new avenues for us. So these are the things, how they got lost and all, they are the topic of research now, which we should really dwell on it.
Monish, I think it takes us back to the subject that you have an unending project at the moment.
Yes.
You have this conversation on Tiefenthaler, and you immediately are not getting to go to rest after this is over. You start working on a monograph when the iron is still hot, and maybe have a contemporary account of Tiefenthaler from some other source in India. It is impossible for a man of this kind of energy and dynamism not to have left a mark. But he talks of a Gujarati, Sadanand, who's done a map of Gujarat. Tiefenthaler tells you about that. Otherwise, we don't know about him.
Know about that, right?
Similarly, maybe he stayed for 12 years somewhere, but in the local folk tradition, there is a reference to a white man who was a Christian missionary who was doing something. So can we, like Salman Rushdie writes about the boy from Florence and in his novel, but I'm not suggesting that somebody writes a work of fiction on him, but an imaginative recreation of a life of a European explorer who came after the original Jesuits, but much before the British explorers. It would make a fascinating study.
But there I would like our deputy to make comment.
Just ask one question, because you told us basically the support of the Jesuits ceased, but he kept on his work. Who supported him then? What did he live off during all this time? Did he cooperate with the local princes? What? Or did he teach?
No, that is a very good question. The question is, if you are a Jesuit priest and live by the teachings of Christ, you practice the virtue of poverty and austerity. And even if the princes are your patrons, you are not the head of the monastery, of the Benedictines or Capuchinos and having ancient mariner or a liqueur and things of that kind. This is the constant problem of the papacy and the cardinals and the lay preachers. I mean, from liberation theology in contemporary times in Latin America and the conflicts in the church. How does he live? If he practices the Christian creed, lives according to teachings to Christ, he lives on very little. He lives off his church offers him and what he lives on. Also in India, the tradition of hermit monks going out with their begging bowls and being fed by Hindus, or for that matter Muslims, would be there. There would be a tradition of a Sikh langar, which would be there in that time. Guru Nanak had done that. Guru Govind Singh had Sikh langars were there. There also was a tradition of Indian, he mentions the inns. He is the only one who describes an inn in Banaras. So Sarayas, which he calls kilachas, a small child fortress kind of a thing. So maybe a person who was not exactly indigent beggar turns up at the inn and he is welcome to stay there for 2 or 3 nights. So the Chhatris in South India and the Dharamshalas in north, or the Annakut where the bhandaras and distribution community kitchens were maintained, either in Sufi dargahs would be there. I would not lose much sleep about that, because I don't think that he was given to a very rich opulent life, and he lived comfortably enough. He wouldn't have survived for 45 years of that stronger climate, as Ruth Jhabwala says, in India, where the life expectancy at the time of independence was 18 years or 19 years. This Europeans survived, and the British soldiers did not. Most of them died young. That's why they came and discovered the hill charms of hill stations. So this man was made of stern and stuff. His spirit was willing, his flesh was not weak, and he lived on very little.
And I would like to add on to it that he had really no monetary problem initially, because he was sent by the Society of Jesuits, and he was appointed director of Jesuit College of Agra. So his basic things were looked after. The only money that he needed was for his journeys, which he had to take on bullock carts or on horses. So that required some money, and also for his measurements. So when Jesuits stopped supporting him at the fag end of his life, when the Akbar's church was taken away from him, so at that time he would have felt dejected, because he had to pursue his work of cartography, which required some money, and for that he went to Kolkata and asked for help from British, which he received and completed his work. And later on, these works became the foundation of the great maps of Hindustan, which were done by French and British. So that's his requirement for money was only for pursuing his interest in cartography and in pursuit of science.
That comes to, I mean, I'd like to, ask that specifically to you, Dr. Pant, since you are a food critic. He had been visiting so many other places. He came to India. Here comes an European to India, stays here. Have you ever come across, or you had some sort of a references, because he makes wonderful references about crops, about the food and about what he liked and dislikes. Have you come across that? No, I did not.
No, because he as an individual priest would not burden the scientific text with his personal preferences or dislikes of food. Which is true, that's one part. But the second part is that even in 20th century, you come across several European priests and Jesuit brothers who lived like Indian natives, like Father Bulke, the Belgian Jesuit in Chhattisgarh region, or take for instance somebody like Madhav Ashish, not quite a Jesuit, but who became an Indian sannyasi. So many of them, there is a story which Manu Pillai has in his Ivory Throne and the sequel to it, that even a Jesuit priest had become a Pandit, converted to Hinduism and learned Sanskrit to preach Christianity to his, not congregation, but his bhakts and devotees. So if you have attained a degree of commitment to your mission, vocation, not only saving souls, but you genuinely believe that you are taking people away from false beliefs, from a path of evil to virtue, you are not only saving them their souls to be delivered in some bank, but you are saving them from the fires of hell. So I do think that he mentions the millets and the crops and so on, and I presume that partly answers his question. He was living off what the land produced, what the people were eating. So he ate the same food. So if he were taking a boat or a ferry or staying, if he were in an inn, he was a house guest. If he was a guest of a prince, he enjoyed a certain amount of luxury. But the day, for him, everything was the same. The day he was on the road, he was like a poor Indian pilgrim.
Right.
And he mentions fruits again and again and again.
That's right.
So
Fruits he has mentioned a lot.
if you talk of a European of that time, he would be used to a lot more meaty diet, but potatoes had just recently come to India with the Portuguese, but he would miss his roasts. He certainly would miss the Iberian pork and he would miss the beef, but he would have enough meat in this country and fish and fowl by the riverside in the Gangetic Plain. I don't think that Indians along the river bank were vegetarian people. They caught fish and
Dr.
so on.
Pant, that was I'm sorry, that was what I wanted to ask. His explanations about crops, his explanation about even the clothing, the style of living, the people, because he has gone deep inside the villages also.
Oh, obviously.
He's gone deep inside the villages, he has seen that. And then how he has the bridges, the small little things.
And the ferries.
And the ferries, everything, and especially with the crops and what fruit he has been growing and all that. But strangely enough, he has been traveling from one region to another region. There is no references of the food element as such.
No, but there is.
Or probably I missed and you know.
No, but there is. Actually, the material which you have supplied to me
Yes.
mentions the specific quotations by Tiefenthaler that this area grows guavas, this area
right.
grows mangoes,
Mangoes,
and
that's right.
mangoes are referred to by an earlier Jesuit priest as a very nutritious, complete food. High in sugar, high in fiber, bad for diabetics, but great food value. So whether it is bananas, guavas, mangoes, sustain a man a long way.
I think so slowly we'll have to come to an end to the session, but I would like Professor Pandya that if you could just, with the last slide, could we have the PPT please? With this slide, if you could, explain as to.
Actually, in the Akbari church only, he was buried. He died in Lucknow. And
I think so he died in 1785 or something like that.
yes, he died at the age of 75 and he was born in 1710. So in 1785 he died. And his body would have been brought to, actually he would have fallen in love with Agra, and he would have written in his testament that he would like to get buried in Agra, and he would be having friends in Agra who would have made this arrangement. And Agra of that time was a cosmopolitan time. There were Armenians, there were Bavarians, there were Jesuits, it was a Mughal Empire, there were Urdu influence, there were Persian influence, all sorts of, it was really a cosmopolitan town which you can compare with any European town of the world. So that would have been his wish, that if he, even though the monetary crisis led him to go to Lucknow, Awadh, but he really wanted to rest at Agra, and there we have his grave today.
His body was brought from Lucknow.
Lucknow. It would have been embalmed and brought in bullock carts or on horse carts and buried here.
Was buried here.
So that's the thing about Agra. I think he was attached to Agra because of his role as a rector in Jesuit College of Agra, and the cosmopolitan nature of Agra would have really led to his love and attachment to Agra.
Dr. Pant, you would like to close?
I think there is a strong Indian connection here, because there are some different views that whether he was buried in Lucknow or buried in Agra. It reminds one of Kabir, the person who tried for a concord between different religions, different conflicting, contending religious ideals. So his devotees and his followers said, we will take Kabir, we will take Kabir. So there is a resonance in this also of the European saint and a missionary by being claimed as the legacy or inheritance of various people.
Yes, you get the stone slabs of Tiefenthaler in Mathura, in Ujjain, in Gwalior.
That's what.
So, in Lucknow. So, but I think the most prominent one is in Agra.
Yeah, that's what this been considered. I think so. We slowly, gradually, will have to come to an end. We'll have to come to an end to our session. This one, what exactly was this?
This is where, this is a book written by Nand Kishore Parekh,
Yes.
which is Raj Darbar or Ranivas, where Tiffin Thaler explains the beautiful roads of Jaipur, and where he calls Jaipur as the
Could
most.
you possibly date this work for us? When was this?
This is a new book, but he had taken the reference from from Tiffin Thaler's works, from that French book.
So this is like a contemporary writer.
It's a contemporary writer
who has taken the
It's
references.
something like Sinha's work. Sinha's work is more comprehensive. This is only up to Jaipur. This is
Sinha Saab's work is academic, and this is the more popular.
more popular.
And it is in a vernacular language. That's what.
Hindi vernacular. There would be more of this in vernacular languages, which is, I think, the need of the hour that we have to
That's
do
your
for the
initial
vernacular.
work for you.
That's true. I think so. With that, we come to an end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I would like now, Professor, our Deputy Head, Mr. Radostich. I think so. There is a lot of problem happening with this PPTs today, which is not functioning properly. But maybe there are a number of thanks which are, we would like to, without whose supports, it wouldn't have been possible, you see. So here we definitely had to acknowledge, and you definitely also in the
Let me
Please.
just, as a final word, thank all of you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Munish, for your extensive research, which was the basis for this discussion. Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you, sir.
Pushpesh. Thank you very much, Dr. Pandya. I think what you said is right. 1 hour is simply too short to dive into and to really understand. So I think we just scratched a bit on the surface of this very interesting personality. But I think what came out very strongly is that, first of all, he spent the bigger part of his life in India. Yes, obviously he's a European, but he's something like became an honorary Indian or something the like, which because really the bigger part of his life he spent here, which is amazing, and it shows the big contribution that he I think made also to this country, many of which have been preserved, many of which have gone lost, as you explained us. But it shows how long our relations actually date back, and it shows how intense they have been over the time. So thank you very much once again. It's been most interesting, and we will continue with our lecture series. So we would urge everyone to.
I think so. We'll come with the next lecture very soon.
Exactly. So we'll please keep your eyes open
With
another very interesting topic, which is also obviously a bilateral topic, because we don't do Austrian only. We do Indian-Austrian because it should be interesting for both sides, and learn a bit more about actually how incredibly close the two countries are. I mean, even though they're far apart, but I mean the relations are stronger than you would think. So thank you very much.
Can we, Dr. Pant and Dr. Pandya, open the floor for
Yes, of course.
Yes,
question and answer session? We have a very brief time to, if there are our guests who are here, would like to question our panelists, are most welcome. Could we have the windows, please?
we are seeing some comments. Maybe they are the questions.
लड़की बहुत अच्छी थी.
There are no questions. There are no questions.
Flawless.
So, is there any question as such? Maybe there's no question coming from anybody? So what I see is that there is a lot of thanks coming from the audience. So thank you very much. And would you like to end the session, Mr. Radostich, with especially the idea which has been given by both the professors about the book? Something would you like to comment on that?
Thank you very much again, and would be great to have.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. We are working, apart from our lecture series, we're working on one or two other publications for the time being. So this could be another idea that we will, of course, consider the request to name a street
Cultural diplomacy.
after Mr. Tiefenthaler. So we shall see about that. Okay, thank you.
Well,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With that, we come to an end of the session.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.